This is a video response to NovelSunrise's video, What Exactly is Wicca? Hi River, I know you posted that video about 3 weeks ago and you've already gotten some really quality responses. I haven't seen all of the video responses, but I can see that many of them are from people who I really respect, and I'm sure that they told you great things. And it looks like I'm looking down because I've got your page called up on the screen, but it looks like you've gotten some really good comments. And honestly, um, it sounds like you're pretty well informed, and you actually have a better handle on it than I think you do. Um, because you're right, there is a lot of variety, and I think even traditional Wicca is inherently eclectic, at least originally. And I mean, so I'll clarify, just because I've seen it, it's come up a couple of times in topics. When I use the phrase eclectic Wicca, I'm referring specifically to um, people who are Wiccan without being initiates um, of British traditional witchcraft. Um, and that's not because they're necessarily any more or less eclectic. It's more because that's sort of the generally accepted label. So that's just, I don't have another term, so eclectic Wicca versus traditional Wicca. Anyway, it looks like you had a lot of really good responses. I haven't watched Mirth and Reverence, Annie's video yet, but from what I can tell, it looks like she discussed the idea that Wicca is primarily based around practice rather than belief, and that there aren't necessarily Wiccan tenets per se. And I'd just like to second that. As a traditionalist myself, I'll say that it has very little to do with what you believe. It's more about engaging in the specific rites and rituals of Wicca that make you Wiccan. And across the board, even amongst traditionalists, there's going to be a swath of beliefs in terms of, I mean, some people are going to be pantheists, some people are going to be polytheists, some people are going to be panentheists. I mean, there's a lot of variety. I know some people who it's not fair to say that they're atheistic necessarily, and I don't think they'd call themselves that. But maybe you could call them archetypists, the idea that maybe the gods aren't literally gods, but they're sort of like thought forms. Like that idea is floating around out there too. And there is no be-all and end-all, this is what Wiccans believe, even amongst traditionalist circles. And with regard to I guess I'll start with the Murphy Hiscock book that you mentioned, which I read last year. I don't remember it super well, but I will say, her Wiccan tenets they don't have anything to do with traditional Wicca, and I can tell you that I mean I don't abide by at least half of the things on that list, and I'm very much Wiccan. And anyway, I think she probably compiled that list for the sake of giving you a general idea, because it would be very useful if you were in some sort of public setting, maybe at a pagan festival, or if you happened to meet a group that described themselves as Wiccan and you didn't necessarily have a whole lot more information about them. There's a really, really good chance that they're going to subscribe to those ideas listed in Murphy Hiscock's list of tenets. But those tenets are not in and of themselves Wiccan. I'll tell you that because Wicca is so much more about practice than belief, there is not a universal idea about things like the afterlife or even things like ethics. Ideas like even the Wiccan Rede was really, the Wiccan Rede as we know it is actually post-Gardner. That's not to say that there weren't related ideas floating around earlier, but the Rede of the Witche, that poem, it was published in Green Egg by I think Gwen Thompson. I think there's some debate about where it originally came from, but it was originally published under Gwen Thompson's name. And anyway, that's really, when people say the Wiccan Rede, they're generally referring to that poem, which has nothing whatsoever to do with at least Gardnerian Wicca. And I will tell you that personally, I mean, I'm Wiccan. I'm not a pantheist. I don't believe in karma, and I don't believe in the threefold law. I also have no personal convictions whatsoever as far as death and the afterlife. And that this itself probably warrants a separate video, but this has never caused any sort of conflict amongst my coven mates. Honestly, it's not something we really talk about because we're too busy practicing Wicca and, conducting the rites of the Wicca. And in terms of deities, this one's kind of sketchy because this is the main. This is sort of the crux of the big stink about whether or not Eclectic Wicca is really Wicca, or maybe we should call it Neo-Wicca, or whatever. Gardnerians will tell you, and I'm speaking for Gardnerian Wicca because that's my experience, but I could probably speak more generally about traditional British Wicca. Wiccans worship very specific gods. However you view those gods, they have very specific names and rites associated with them. And that material is oath-bound. And what a lot of the people who argue and get upset about this idea that, oh, well, Eclectic Wicca isn't really Wicca, one of the arguments that gets tossed out is, well, if you're not serving or working with or worshiping the gods of the Wicca, then you are not Wiccan. That's the argument that's made, okay? And this is not me advocating any sort of personal soapbox. I'm just kind of trying to clarify something. So that's kind of the crux of things. And I will tell you that I personally have never subscribed to the idea that all gods and goddesses are really reflections of a single god and goddess, and I've never seen that in traditional Wicca. I mean, I don't know, I don't even really have words because that idea is just so odd to me. That's not to say that Wiccans don't work with other gods and spirits at times, but that doesn't necessarily pertain to their Wiccan practice. Like, for example, I've said it in earlier videos, but I subscribe to the idea that you can engage in more than one religion. Honestly, this isn't really a problem anywhere else except for, in Europe and North America. It's a very Western idea that you can only belong to one religion, and even the concept of a religion is very Western. But for example, I'm Wiccan and I practice Wicca, but I also serve other gods and spirits. And when I am engaging in those sorts of rituals and practice and that sort of worship, I'm doing it in a format that's appropriate to those gods and spirits. And 99% of the time, that format has nothing to do with Wicca, because those gods and spirits they come from their own cultures and they have their own contexts, and Wicca doesn't make sense for them. And my personal experience has been that a lot of the time these gods, they don't necessarily care for Wicca, or they don't care about it, but they don't want to be in that context. That's been my personal experience with the other three gods that I work with. Anyway, and like I said, it's going to be different for different people, but that's been my experience, and I don't feel like, that's something else that I engage in, and that doesn't have anything to do with the work that I do as a Wiccan, as a witch, necessarily, and it certainly doesn't have anything to do with my coven. So anyway, like I said, I haven't watched all of the response videos you've gotten, so maybe I'm not saying anything new, or I'm just kind of beating a dead horse, so to speak. But just to kind of like, if that clarifies anything for you, then I hope it's been helpful. I wouldn't get too hung up on what Murphy Hiscock has to say, just because, I mean, according to her, I'm not Wiccan, and that's, I mean, frankly, that's just silly. So I think maybe her list is useful in terms of trying to apply it more generally in public sort of situations. Like, it's probably useful on YouTube, for example, but those tenets are not inherently Wiccan, because, I mean, I'll second the folks who said that Wicca really doesn't have tenets. It's more about the sorts of rituals you engage in, and, I mean, it's more about what you do. And belief is going to vary from practitioner to practitioner, even amongst traditionalists. So anyway, if you're comfortable with the term Wiccan and you want to use it, then I think you should use it. Personally, those of you who've watched my videos before know that I work really hard to be diplomatic when I talk about stuff like this, because I know it's really touchy. Personally, I don't have any problem whatsoever with solitary Wicca or eclectic Wicca. Even the idea of solitary Wicca, the only thing that bothers me about it is the implication that traditionalists don't practice solitary. Because that's just weird, because I belong to a coven, but hey, I'm not with my coven most days of my life, and I'm still a Wiccan, so most of my practice is solitary. I mean, I have solitary rituals, and I work on my own. I just also work with a group. So I think there's an implication there that gets ignored. So I prefer, you know, traditional Wicca versus eclectic Wicca, rather than talking about solitary Wicca. But I digress. So personally, I don't have a problem with people, you know, reading Scott Cunningham or whoever and assembling things as they go, or belonging to other sorts of groups and traditions that are not related to British Wicca. I think if something's spiritually fulfilling for you, then great, you should do it. And if you want to call it Wicca, then I don't have a problem with that. So if that's a term that you're comfortable with, then I think regardless of what Murphy Hiscock has to say, you know, whatever. Because, like, I don't think that she has any more power over the term than you do. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents. So, hopefully that was some sort of contribution. But anyway, have a good night.